Great. So good morning, everyone. This is Britney Samuelson from the Iowa Afterschool Alliance. Today, we're going to do a webinar about advocacy and to prepare you if you're planning to attend for the Afterschool Snack at the Capitol on February 12th. Before we get started, just a quick announcement to let you all know that registration for the Impact After School Conference went live yesterday. So you all should have received an email about it. And we're hoping that you can register to attend soon to ensure that you have a spot at the conference, which is being held in Des Moines from April 1st through April 3rd. And in addition to that, just as a reminder, 21st Century grantees are required to attend Impact. At least one member from your program should be there, but we really encourage you to bring as many staff members as you can for a day full of professional development and networking opportunities. We have some really neat things in store for you at Impact this year. So we're hoping that you register. And if you have any questions about that, please do not hesitate to reach out to me or my colleague, Crystal Hall. And I'm getting a little bit of feedback still, so please make sure that your computer speakers and phone lines are muted. Still hearing that feedback. I'll go ahead and get started, but please do double check your speakers and phone lines. Okay, so in store for the agenda today, we are going to spend the first half of the webinar talking about what advocacy is, and then we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about the after-school snack specifically. Like I said, that's on February 12th. And I understand that some of you may not be attending the after-school snack, but I think there's still some good tips in this section of the webinar on advocacy and on our priorities surrounding after-school programming. I think the feedback's gone, so thank you to whoever made that correction. So advocacy is, I just wanted to start off the webinar with some general information about what advocacy is. I think for a lot of people, advocacy can be a scary thing, especially if you're not familiar with it. So generally speaking, advocacy is educating and raising awareness on a specific issue. And it also involves bringing in your story and your experiences and sharing them with people who make decisions about our society and our life. This is crucial. People cannot make laws without folks like you going up and advocating with them. Our lawmakers, our elected officials, they're smart people, but they're not experts. You all are the experts, especially when it comes to after school and what's happening with our children in Iowa. They rely on you to understand what's going on in the field and to understand what they can do to help and to make your lives easier and to support children and families in Iowa. So advocacy really is a crucial thing, and it's something that cannot be ignored. And I think when you look at it that way, it becomes less scary, and really you can see it as more of something that can be helpful and impactful for the kids and families that you serve. With advocacy, there's a big piece of relationship building. So advocacy can't be done once. When you're speaking with legislators, you want to make sure you build that relationship up over time, especially if you want them to see you as an expert. If you build a relationship and keep in touch with them throughout the legislative session, throughout the summer, they will begin to see you as a reliable source for information and eventually end up calling on you for advice for the decisions they have to make. So advocacy is more than a one-time deal, but it's something that takes place over time and something that you really put some heart into and some thought into to build those relationships with policymakers. Advocacy can look a lot of different ways. I think when people hear about advocacy, please make sure that your computer speakers are muted. Thank you. I think when people think about advocacy, they think about going up to the Capitol at the State House and talking to legislators and going to that big building with the Golden Dome, which can be intimidating, but it doesn't have to be that way. Advocacy can look a lot of different ways, such as writing letters to legislators, writing letters to your local newspaper and having them publish a story about after school. It can be simply talking with legislators up at the Capitol or when they're back in their in your hometown, and it can look like hosting events too for legislators or policymakers to attend. Essentially, advocacy is speaking up for others, and in your role, this piece is really important because kids, they do not vote. They cannot use their voting power to influence legislators or to make sure that their voice is heard. So you are really responsible for speaking up for the kids and making sure that you can relay to the legislators and policymakers what's going on with them and what the kids need. I think this is the most important part. And I know you all speak up for kids every day in your lives and your community. So this is just extending that and taking it a step further and making sure that those stories get relayed to policymakers too. And again, advocacy is a daily activity. This is something that you can spend a little time on every day. And it's probably something that you're already spending time on, but you just don't know it yet. Anytime that you're out in the community and talking to someone about what it is you do with the kids, what your program does with the kids, that's advocacy, and that's educating and raising awareness about after school. And then finally, advocacy is fun. It doesn't have to be a scary thing. It doesn't have to be an intimidating thing. You're just sharing what you know best, and that's after school, and that's the kids and families in your community. And once you feel empowered to do that, it can be really fun to be that expert and to be that reliable source for legislators. So along that same vein, advocacy is not influencing specific legislation. That's where we get more into the lobbying territory, which I'll speak about in a little bit. But for example, if you were to go approach a lawmaker and ask them to make the Oreo the national cookie of Iowa, and there's a specific piece of legislation on that, that is when you get into the lobbying territory. Lobbying isn't bad, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but there is a difference between the two. And again, advocacy is not just done one time. If you really want to establish yourself as an expert and make some change in policy and in law and build those relationships, advocacy has to be a continuous effort. And then advocacy is also not only focused on legislators and other elected officials. Like I said, anytime that you are out in your communities and advocating for after school and telling people what it is you do and the impact that you have on kids and families, that's advocacy. It's raising awareness on the issue, and it's making sure more people understand the importance of after school and out of school time. And then finally, advocacy is not difficult. Anyone can do it. Even if it's writing a letter every once in a while, or participating in a community event, or doing something that's small, it's important, and there's a role that you can play to use your strengths and to use the things that you're good at to work with legislators and raise awareness on issues. And please, if you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to interrupt me or write them in the chat box. I'm happy to take them at any time. So we talked about what advocacy is and what it isn't, but what does it look like? So there are a lot of different ways that advocacy can look, and there are a lot of different activities that can be associated with advocacy. The first is contacting legislators to thank them for their work on children's issues, especially 21st century community learning centers funding, which many of you know is the only dedicated source of funding for after school that Iowa has access to. So often when our congressmen and women vote for 21st century funding, or are supportive of 21st Century, we, as the Iowa Afterschool Alliance, will reach out to them and thank them for their support for this important funding stream. Advocacy can also look like letters to the editor and editorials in your local newspaper. If you were interested in doing one of these, you could submit a brief story to your local newspaper about the importance of after school. And it doesn't even have to be a policy ask or even directed towards an elected official, but it's just, again, raising that awareness with the entire community. And if that's something that you're interested in doing, the Iowa Afterschool Alliance is happy to help you write that piece. We have a few sample letters to the editor that you could use and just plug your information into. And we think it's a great way to raise awareness of the issue because we know policymakers and other community leaders are reading their local newspapers frequently, and it makes a difference when they see those things pop up because they know it's something that their constituents and that their voters care about. Advocacy is not limited to Congress or to state legislators. It can also be done at the local level. So when you're thinking about your mayor or your city council or even your school board, these are people that can be influential and people that also need to know the impact of after school. You can use social media to educate stakeholders and legislators and policymakers. Most policymakers today have social media accounts, so it's something that you can tag them in on Twitter or use a hashtag that is specific to your community, or post pictures of kids in programs and make sure that you're following legislators and that they're following you. That's a really easy way to get the message out without having to spend a lot of time doing it and spending a lot of time in meetings. You can show up to town halls or constituent coffees in your district. So most state legislators and members of Congress and even mayors and school board members will host events in their district where they want to hear from constituents. They open up a block of time at a local coffee shop and ask their constituents to come in and speak to them about the issues that they care about. So that is a perfect time to go in and speak to a captive audience of legislators and policymakers about after school or any other issues that are affecting your community and families and kids in your community. And then I think the most important thing that we can do as after school advocates is site visits with policymakers. These are so powerful because it gives policymakers the opportunity to see what is happening at after school programs in their district and to see the impact that it has on children. You all shine in your programs, you all do great work. So it's one thing to tell your legislators and your policymakers about it, but it's an entirely other thing for them to come in and see it. Many of you know that the caucuses for presidential candidates are next week. And leading up to the caucuses, the Iowa Afterschool Alliance has been coordinating site visits with after-school programs across the state and with presidential candidates, so presidential candidates can see the impact of after school. And these site visits have been really successful. We've gotten some great local media coverage out of it, some great pictures for social media that we've been able to share and use frequently. And then the kids love it too. They love knowing that someone who is interested in policy is also interested in their program. So that's a really great way that you can interact with legislators and introduce them to the kids and give the legislators an opportunity to really hear from the kids how they feel about their program. And if you're ever interested in hosting a site visit, the Iowa Afterschool Alliance has a lot of resources in this area. We have a site visit guide that makes it pretty easy to host a site visit. And we're also happy to help you do outreach to your local legislators or mayors or policymakers. And we're happy to even be there on site the day of if you want that extra support. It's something that we think is really important. So earlier I touched on lobbying, and so I wanted to go a little bit more in depth there because I know that it is a little confusing to understand the difference between lobbying and advocacy. So remember, advocacy is raising awareness about an issue or educating someone about an issue. You get into that lobbying territory when you try to influence specific legislation. Again, if there's a bill about making the Oreo the national cookie or the state cookie of Iowa, and you try to talk to a legislator about supporting that specific bill, that's when you get into lobbying territory. And lobbying isn't bad, but there are some things that you need to know about it to make sure that you're following the rules for your organization and making sure that you understand where the line is. So if your position is completely funded by 21st Century Community Learning Centers grant, then you cannot lobby while you're charging your time to the grant. So if you're on the clock, when we go to the after-school snack on February 12th, you cannot ask a legislator to vote on a certain bill because federal funds cannot be used for lobbying. However, if you go home that evening and you're no longer on the clock, you're just a regular private citizen, you can send an email or a letter or call your legislator as a private citizen not affiliated with your program and tell them how important after school or any issue is to you. You cannot get in trouble for that because that is what you're doing as a private citizen and you have the right to do that. If your position isn't completely funded by 21st Century and you have other funding sources that fund your position or pay for your time, you may be able to lobby. You need to check with your supervisors or your funder to see if that is allowed as part of their funding stream and part of their funding for your program and your position. Some nonprofits are okay with lobbying using their money. Others are not. It all just depends on the grant and your funding source. And so that will be a case-by-case basis. And if you have any concerns about that, I'd check with your organization, your supervisors, or if you're unsure or uncomfortable, I would just stick to educating and the raising awareness piece and not cross over into that lobbying territory. And kind of a good way to get around this is to ask partners or families to lobby for after school. So if you work closely with a business that's very supportive of your after school program, or if you have families that have great stories and that want to talk to policymakers about your program, they have no restrictions on lobbying. They can happily do that for you, and many do. So I would just make sure that if you ever have a site visit or if you are ever wanting to coordinate an advocacy or lobbying effort in your community, to engage those partners because they are a lot more free in what they can do. Any questions about that? I know that can get a little confusing. Okay, seeing none, I'll keep going, but just let me know if you have any questions. So I wanted to take a moment to talk about the legislative process at the state and federal levels, just briefly and broadly, because I know that can be confusing for folks too, and especially if you want to advocate and raise awareness on issues, it's important to know that you can do that at any point in the legislative process. So the legislative process always starts with an idea that's indicated through this light bulb here, and that's a place where you can influence and educate. Oftentimes, legislators get ideas for legislation or for bills from their constituents who come to them with an idea or with a need in their community that they had not known about before. The legislators then take those ideas and turn them into bills. And those bills are assigned to committees or subcommittees in the Senate and the House of Representatives, those two chambers of government. That's also a time that you can raise awareness on these issues. You can work with those committee members on both the Senate or the House to help educate them on whatever they're going to be talking about on the issue of after school broadly. and to help them just become more educated and more aware of what's going on in their communities, to help them do their jobs better. The bill then needs to pass that committee to go to either the full Senate or the full House for a vote. Once it passes the committee, if it passes the committee, it'll go to the full House or Senate for a vote, and you can do more advocacy and more raising awareness there with all of the members of the House or the Senate. Once it's passed by the House or the Senate, then it will go to a committee in the opposite chamber. So if it started in the Senate and it passed the Senate, it will go to a House committee too, and the House committee will have to pass that out as well. So you really should be raising awareness in both the Senate and the House, and with both parties as well, on after school and on whatever issue you're trying to raise awareness and educate on. Once it passes out of that opposite committee, it will go to that opposite full chamber for a vote, just like it did the first time. And then if it passes both the House and the Senate, then it will go to the governor for them to sign. The governor can choose to sign it and then it becomes law, or the governor can choose to veto the bill. And then it has an opportunity to go back to the House and Senate to get a 2/3 vote to override that veto. Anyway, that can get a little technical and a little complicated, but the point is that there's opportunities to raise awareness and to educate at all levels of the legislative process, whether that's with an individual legislator, a committee such as the Education or Human Resources Committee, with any member in the House or the Senate, and with the governor's office. They all want to hear from you, and they all need to hear from you to understand what's going on with after-school programming. So that concludes the first part of the webinar about advocacy in general. And now I want to switch over to the Afterschool Snack, which is the Iowa Afterschool Alliance's annual day at the Capitol. This year, our annual event at the Capitol will be on Wednesday, February 12th, so we're coming up in just a couple weeks here, and we're getting really excited to head up to the Capitol in Des Moines and talk to legislators. The event will be hosted in the Legislative Dining Room, and I'll show you a map of where that is soon in case you're planning on attending. We will have hot cocoa and cookies provided for you and for the legislators. And this is really an opportunity for legislators to come in and speak with you. It makes it easy to do advocacy for you because we will invite all of the legislators to come in and talk to you in an open house format. We will try to pair a legislator from your district with you if they are able to attend so that you can talk to them about what's going on in your community. And it's really that opportunity to put advocacy in action and for you to be the expert on this issue. We would love it if you brought youth with you to the after school snack because, again, it's really it's good when legislators hear from you about how after school is going and what after school means to kids, but it's even more impactful when they hear it directly from the kids themselves. So we would love it if kids could come. And if you do plan on bringing kids, we found that it's helpful and fun if you can bring projects or activities such as board games or chess sets, or if you have pictures from your program throughout the year, or if kids are working on robots this fall or something exciting that they could bring and present to the legislators. We find that to be fun for the kids, so they have something to do and something to work on during that time. And then also it's really, it makes it more enjoyable for the legislators to see what's actually going on too. And if you are interested in bringing kids, the Iowa Afterschool Alliance is able to reimburse your mileage if you're bringing youth. So please keep that in mind, and if you have any other questions about that, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And then just a quick couple of logistical things if you're planning on attending the event. Parking around the Capitol can get a little hairy this time of year. So I've circled a couple places that are usually reliable to get parking spots. So you'll see lot 15 or lot 5. Those are probably the closest public parking spots that you'll be able to get. If there's a lot going on at the Capitol that day, or if there's a big committee meeting, those lots might be filled up too. So usually I head over to lot 26 or lot 3 and 4. It's a bit of a jaunt, but I think it's good to know where those places are. Otherwise, you're circling the Capitol complex for quite a while. And then our event will be held in the legislative dining room, which is right on the ground floor. As soon as you walk into the Capitol and go through security, we'll have signage posted, so you won't be able to miss us. And then to give you a little background about, again, the legislative process and the timing of our event, Funnel Week is February 21st. So that Funnel Week is the date that any bills that start in the House have to be passed out of the House to be considered by the Senate, and vice versa. Any bills that are started by the Senate need to be passed out of the full Senate to be considered by the House. So this is a really important date because if you don't get your bill passed by February 21st in one of the chambers, then it's basically dead and you have to wait until next session. So most organizations like the Iowa Afterschool Alliance try to have their days at the Capitol or their lobby days before this date so that they can make sure they're talking to their legislators about issues with enough time to get legislation passed out of a chamber if they need to do it. With after school and childcare issues, we really focus on two committees in both the House and the Senate, and that is Education and Human Resources. So I just think that's good background information for you to have if you're going to be talking to legislators. And we've picked out a few target legislators from the Education and Human Resources committees that we're hoping show up to our event. You can see this list here, but these are chair members or ranking members of the Education, Human Resources committees, Education Appropriations committees, people that really hold the purse strings and the power when it comes to after school. I would hope that you would take a look at this list, and if any of these legislators represent you and your community, I've put those communities in parentheses. It would be great if you could reach out to them and send them a personal invitation to let them know that you will be at the Capitol with the Afterschool Alliance, and you'd hope that they'd come and visit with you a little bit. If you don't know who your legislators are, there's a great link on the legis.iowa.gov website where you can plug in your address, your home address or your school or program address, to figure out who the legislators are that represent you. I encourage you all to do this whether or not you're going to be coming to the after-school snack because it's just good to know. And if you want to be more active in advocacy, you'll need to know who these people are in case you want to write them a letter or meet with them at their local town halls or constituent coffees. Like I said on the last slide, I think it would be great if you could send a personalized invitation to your legislator, whether they're a targeted legislator or not, to attend the after-school snack. If you want some sample language or want help drafting that invitation, I'm more than happy to help you. We'll be sending out invitations as the Iowa Afterschool Alliance, but it is way more important for the legislators to get those invitations from their constituents so that they know that people in their district care about this issue. And if you're planning on attending the after-school snack or any event with a legislator, really your main job is to talk about after-school programming, your after-school program, and the need for programming in your community. So to prepare, I would think about a list of examples of activities that your program provides. Did you do some STEM activities this year? Did you take some neat field trips? think about those things that the kids really enjoyed and come prepared with some examples of those. Do you offer additional support to families outside of after-school programming? For instance, do you get families connected with adult literacy programs at their community college? That's a great thing to share with legislators too, so that they see that you're doing things outside of just after-school programming, but that you're a support for the entire community and adults as well. Invite your legislators to visit your program. Those site visits, like I said earlier, can be so impactful. If you have any data, which if you're a 21st century program, I know that you do, come prepared with some of that. We'll have some data at the state level, but again, if you're talking to your legislator, they're really interested about what's going on in their community and in their district. So if you can share quantitative data like numbers about academic improvement, or even just stories from kids about behaviors you've seen improve, or great testimonies to your program, those are all really compelling for legislators to hear. And then I think legislators oftentimes are interested in how after-school programs are funded. So be prepared to discuss that. If you're a 21st century program, many state legislators probably won't know what that is. So be prepared to share with them that it's a federal grant program that is a very competitive application process that you have been awarded. If you receive child care assistance funds through DHS, share that with them. If you charge fees or if you rely on community partners, these are all good things to share so that legislators and policymakers understand the need in the community and how you all are fulfilling that need, and if there's additional need that needs to be met. General do's and don'ts when you're talking to legislators. I think a lot of this is pretty obvious, but I wanted to make sure to touch on it. Do your homework on the legislator. If you have never heard of that legislator's name when you put in your address on that website I just shared, do a little research on what committees they're on what they did before they became a legislator. Most legislators have other jobs outside of being a senator or representative, so see what they do. You might be surprised to find that some of them are teachers or educators or childcare providers themselves. So it's really important to do that homework on them, so when you go into those conversations, you have some background and you can share things that would be relevant to them. Be credible and reliable. If they ask you a question that you don't know the answer to, don't try to make something up on the spot. It is always okay to say that you'll get back to them later and to make sure that you follow up if you do tell them that you will. Be clear and concise in your explanation. Like I said, a lot of state legislators probably won't know what 21st century grants are. So when you're talking about those, try to be clear and concise. Don't get too into the weeds or into jargon if you're not ready to explain what that is. I always advise to make an ask, even if that isn't a policy ask. If you're wanting to avoid lobbying, there are other asks you can make. Ask them to come visit your program. Ask them to work with you to find new community partners. Ask them to visit a program or write a letter to the editor about your program. There are a lot of different things you can ask, or ask them to have another meeting with you, get coffee with you outside of this day at the Capitol. There are a lot of things you can ask to help build that relationship and maintain it over time. Respect their time. A lot of legislators will be able to come in and visit with you for a while, but some might just be able to pop in and get a cookie and take a picture with you. Whatever that is, be respectful and understand that they're really busy up there and they have a lot of different organizations and constituents that want to speak to them. And so just be grateful for the time that you get with them, and don't be offended if they have to run out really quickly. Say thank you for their time. Again, they have a lot of different things that they need to do when they're up at the Capitol, so being grateful and gracious is always a good thing and will help build your credibility and their respect for you. And then again, follow up. If you told them that you were going to follow up with data or for information about funding or any other thing that they asked you about, be sure to do that. And if you need any help with that, the Iowa Afterschool Alliance is always here to help. And then again, don't use jargon or get too into the weeds about the QRS system unless they ask. Some legislators may be very familiar with some of the things that you'll be talking about, and they'll ask more expertise and technical questions. But I think it's safer to assume that most don't know all of the technicalities about after school and childcare. And so try not to use our kind of industry lingo if you can avoid it. Again, don't lie or exaggerate. If there's something you don't know or something you don't feel comfortable answering, it's better to just get back to them later. And then don't become confrontational. Even if a legislator tells you that they don't support after-school programming at all and they think it's a waste of time, don't become confrontational, because that will further embed those ideals into their head. So just remember that you are always an example of not only your program, but of after-school programming across the state and our great network. And so just always be mindful of that. And then quickly, for those of you who may be lobbying at the Afterschool Snack, or for those of you who just want to be aware about what the Iowa Afterschool Alliance is lobbying for this year, I put together a few slides on what our legislative priorities are, just in case legislators ask you about them, or just in case you want to be in the loop on what it is that we're doing this session. The first is to establish or to reinstate the before and after school grants program. So for those of you who have been around for a while, you may remember that we had this grant program at the state level, similar to 21st Century, that was established in 2007. And the funding ended with the recession in 2009. They had to do a lot of funding cuts at the state level. And unfortunately, our program was never refunded, and it was taken out of code a couple years ago. So like I said earlier, without this funding, Iowa does not have a designated stream of funding at the state level for after-school programs. So many of you are hoping for that 21st Century grant or piecing together other resources without a lot of support from the state, and we'd like to see that change. Many states surrounding Iowa, our neighbors, such as Kansas, Illinois, Minnesota, Nebraska, all have designated appropriations at the state level for after school. When you compare Iowa to its neighbors, it sometimes puts the pressure on legislators for them to be like a little embarrassed maybe that they're not doing something that their neighbors are doing. So that's a good talking point that we like to share. And then if they ask any more about what that grant program looked like, it was a competitive grant program, so programs had to apply for it. And the awards were much smaller than the 21st Century grant, so about $30,000 to $50,000 to both public schools and private nonprofit organizations to expand after school and summer programs. Applicants had to have a match, so it's not just like a handout from the state. There's some work that needs to be done at the community level too. And the law required a rural and urban balance, which is often important for our rural legislators up at the Capitol. And then I think a great talking point, whether you're lobbying for this specific policy or not, is that demand for 21st century programs is so high that for every only two applications are funded out of, or wait, I'm sorry, 2 applications out of every 3 are not funded because there is so much demand and we just do not have the funding to meet that demand, which is a way that the state could step up. Our second priority is around college and career exploration and after school. So several years ago, the governor put together a task force called the Future Ready Iowa Alliance, and it was stakeholders of business and education and community leaders who were trying to figure out how to get more Iowans to graduate from post-secondary education degrees. And one of the recommendations of the Afterschool Alliance, or of the Future Ready Iowa Alliance, was to expand after school and summer programming with an emphasis on high demand career exploration. And so we believe in that recommendation from the Future Ready Iowa Alliance, But since that's been recommended, there has been no action around this. So we would like to see action being taken. Specifically because we believe that after school provides a great venue for career exploration, because you all can have the kids doing hands-on stuff and bringing in speakers and going on field trips to different careers that they just can't do in the classroom during the school day. So because of the informal and the flexible structure of after school and summer programming, we really think that after school is the key venue to do career and college exploration. According to our last study of after-school programs across Iowa, only 18% of sites are currently offering college and career readiness. So this is a great area that the state could work to expand what's already being done in the state and to make sure that more of you have access to resources to implement some of this programming. Less than 1/3 of Iowans who take the ACT for admittance into college meet all benchmarks for college readiness. So that's even more of a reason why we need to focus on college and career exploration to make sure that we're giving students the skills they need to be successful as they graduate from high school. And then at the Iowa Afterschool Alliance, with our partners across the country, we have some really great examples of college and career readiness that have been implemented into after school with a lot of really great success that we can share with legislators as best practices and as ways that we know that this works and that we could be doing more in Iowa. And then finally, our third priority is around childcare assistance. I know many of you are licensed through DHS to receive childcare assistance CCA funds from your families who qualify. And in Iowa, there's a childcare desert, and a lot of families either don't have access to after school or childcare programs in their communities, or they can't afford them. So we're really looking at both of those issues and advocating with the legislature to do something about it. So currently, childcare assistance is available for families whose income is at 145% of the federal poverty level, which is about $11 an hour. After families make more than $11 an hour, all of their childcare assistance benefits are cut, and they have to pay the full amount of childcare. And so you can imagine, and I'm sure many of you have stories from the families that you work with, how devastating that is to have that support for childcare and then to have to front the entire bill once you're no longer income eligible. Iowa has one of the lowest income eligibility rates in the country. And so we're advocating to raise that income eligibility to 185% of the federal poverty level to support more families in need, because we know that if you're making about $12 an hour, it's still pretty hard to afford your after-school programs and to afford childcare. Childcare providers currently, and many of you are probably familiar with this, childcare providers and after-school program providers who receive childcare assistance do not get paid the entire market rate for that child. Currently, Iowa law only reimburses 75% of the 2014 market rate for childcare assistance. So this means that many of you who are accepting childcare assistance are getting paid way less than market rate for this year. And the benchmark is for 2014, so it's way outdated. So we're going to be advocating to change this to the current market rate, to 75% of the 2020 market rate, to ensure that you all can accept childcare assistance, because I know that many programs have to put a cap on the number of childcare assistance spots they can accept, because it's just not financially responsible or feasible for you all to accept children into your program that aren't able to pay what you need to run your program. And then we're focusing on this issue because about 42% of children served through the Child Care Assistance Program with DHS are school-age children. So we know a lot of the children that we serve in after school are eligible for child care assistance, and their families do qualify for it. And again, we do have a childcare desert in the state. We've lost about 42% of our licensed and registered childcare providers. That's both school age and early childhood between 2013 and 2018. And this is an issue that legislators are really focusing on this year because it's bad for our workforce, it's bad for our economy. When we don't have childcare providers in many communities, especially rural across the state, and our families can't afford childcare, then they can't go to work. We can't recruit new businesses to Iowa because we don't have a workforce that knows that their children are taken care of when they're at work. If your program accepts child care assistance and has struggled with that, or if you found it to be a positive experience, please come prepared to share those stories with your own legislators because, again, this is a big, hot issue at the state house this year. And I think a lot of legislators are looking at it from like a 0 to 5 lens. They're thinking about toddlers and infants in childcare, but they really need to realize that a big chunk of childcare assistance and childcare is after school programming and for school age youth too. So with that, that's our final legislative priority with the Iowa Afterschool Alliance. Are there any questions about those or about anything that I've shared with you all today? Feel free to unmute your line or type in the chat box. Well, seeing no feedback, no questions, I'd just like to say thank you all for joining the webinar today. I hope you learned a lot about advocacy, and I hope we'll see you at the After School Snack on February 12th. If you have any questions in the days to come or in the weeks to come, please do let me know. And if you have any questions about bringing kids to the After School Snack,